And I'm excited, and we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Alana. This is Digital Green Book. I am one half of Digital Green Book, and I am on a mission to bring you as many high caliber individuals that I meet in my everyday life while I'm just on my journey. As y'all know, I was a registered nurse for 13 years, worked in the ICU. I'm very passionate about advocacy in many spaces, and then there's a whole host of other things that I do. But I'm so blessed and so honored today to bring you Ashley. This young lady is so phenomenal. I found her through a series of LinkedIn connections and reached out to her one day on Instagram. And she was so open and receptive and willing to have a conversation with me. If you plug in with Ashley's IG, you'll see that she's a jet setter. She travels all over the country and even internationally to advocate for literally people inside of the marijuana and cannabis space. There's so much knowledge that is to be gained inside of this space, and we really want to take time to destigmatize that for you today. Ashley wears so many other hats as well, but the bulk of today's topic is on cannabis, so that is my primary focus today. But I definitely want you to plug in with her after. I will be linking her social medias, and we're going to get straight into it. Thank you so much, Ashley, for being here today.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here. I love the idea of a digital green book, by the way. Like, that's super dope.
I'm so honored. So honored. So one of the main things that made me reach out to you, aside from locks, melanin, aside from all of that, it was the fact that you had a bit even more experience than I do in the nursing field, and you sort of transition into this space where you're heavily advocating inside of the cannabis industry now and connecting nurses to education, connecting patients to better modalities of treating their pain as opposed to the traditional routes of opiates and everything else they got going on out there in these streets.
Mhm.
And literally branching out into other revenues of income. So could you tell me
Mhm.
a little bit about what made you transition your nursing passion into the marijuana field?
Yeah, so that's a long story, but we can go there.
Yeah.
So, 14 years of nursing, graduated 2008, traditional bedside nurse. My background was med surg tele. I spent most of my time doing med surg tele. And then I ended up getting my master's degree in nursing education because I love the precept. I love teaching people. And I realized that when I used to precept all the time. Don't make me charge nurse. Don't put me in there. Don't do that. I'd rather precept any day.
I'm not taking any assignments. We're not doing that.
Right. No, not at all. So once I started noticing that I was constantly being put with, the orientees and especially the new grad orientees, because you had to spend more time with them and nobody wanted to spend the whole 12 to 16 weeks with the new grad, right? I loved it. I was happy with it. And for me, it was about the development, the transformation, all those kind of things. So I went and got my master's degree, nursing education. While I was getting my degree, I was working in float pool. So I think I had three. I had three jobs. It was in three different hospitals, float pooling. So this was before COVID, before like travel nursing and float pooling, all those kind of things were a thing. And I remember getting so much back, like, why are you doing that? That looked like so much work. How you keep up with your schedule? I'm like, but they paying me good. I don't, and at the time, I didn't need to worry about health insurance because of my husband's job. So I was like, why not? I'm gonna make my schedule on my terms so I can go to school and take care of my kid, right? So fast forward after I graduated, I went into transition of practice. So again, it was new grads. I spent the first year with a cohort of new grads where I was like, I was pretty much their like mom, nurse mom, where I made sure that they was good for the first year. They weren't getting bullied. Made sure they learned everything they were supposed to be learned in order to be competent, like hard skills and soft skills. You know what I mean? Like confidence, delegation, things like that. And
Mhm.
at that point, I was considered a nurse leader. And for me, the politics were kind of shocking because I went from flow pool, I can do what I want kind of thing. I show up, hey, y'all, to now I'm in the mix of the politics. And politics at the leadership level look kind of crazy.
Yes.
Um, and so I ended up leaving there because it was also a long commute for me. So I ended up leaving there, and fast forward a couple more years, I ended up in corporate, making six figures, project management, performance improvement, I was implementing stuff. You know how they be like, corporate said to do it. I was them
You
for a
were
little
corporate.
bit.
That's awesome.
um, and it was great, you know, like for me, as I was moving through my career, I was like, you know, I was always looking for the next thing to do. I was always trying to progress my career. I was always trying to do something better and greater. And, you know, as many of us have dreams of just making a 6 figure income. Well, I get to the 6 figure income. Next thing I know, I'm being retaliated against. I'm being bullied. I'm being, you know, all these things. I started suffering from insomnia. I started having severe back pain, like just all of these kind of residual side effects just from being in this high pressure position. And the biggest issue was when I was a victim of cyber theft. So we were trying to buy a house,
Mm-hmm.
and my down payment was stolen from me. And so that just spiraled into a whole new set of issues, like on top of what was already going on in the corporate setting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through what people go through when they're stolen from. And, you know, they were like, oh, well, you changed. You ain't working as hard. You ain't hitting those deadlines the way you used to hit the deadlines. We don't know if you a good fit for the job. And it's 2, 3 years into the job. So y'all just decided that I ain't a good fit for the job.
There's no
Okay.
care or concern, I feel like, in the corporate space, generally speaking, for when people go through things in life, be it childbirth,
Right.
death in the family, hurricane. Yeah.
Right. Right. Like just I mean, overall wellness is just not a consideration. And that's kind of where I got like that it was it. Like I took time off. I went out on FMLA. I came back from FMLA. They were like, "Oh, well, you ain't hit this deadline. Well, that's technically retaliation. You cannot expect me to hit a deadline when I've been out for 2 months for FMLA." Right? So, I ended up leaving that job. I took a job that was half my salary. It was a choice between getting taking this other job or getting on a performance improvement plan, which at that point you might as well just wait for your demise anyway.
You'll
So,
never or match up to what they want.
right. So I took the job that was half my salary, and in the midst of that, I was already doing a lot of research in the cannabis space. I had already started doing yoga because I mentioned that I was already suffering from insomnia. I was already having this back pain, so I started looking into yoga, and you know, it just kind of went from there. Like there are these other like ideas around what holistic medicine was, around what wellness was, what health is, being able to be in tune with your body, which I wasn't at that time. You know, being able to meditate, be with yourself, kind of take inventory of your mindset at that time. And I had no control over any of it. So as I started discovering myself, cannabis started becoming part of what I was understanding could be part of a wellness journey. Um, so eventually, I created my training course. In my mind, I'm like, oh, cannabis can help so many people. Let me go, you know, create this training course so I could teach the world. And then I don't have to do nothing else. That's how I saw it in my head. I don't have to do nothing else. I'll teach everybody else about it and they going to do it. And the first time I had my training course, nobody came. The second time, I was able to secure 5 people to come to my training course. And that was before COVID. It was live, it was in person. We had food, we did it up. And it,
Hey.
you know, yeah, it was dope. So, you know, fast forward, and I won't talk too much longer, but fast forward, I you know, I realized even though I was teaching people about cannabis, that there was a lot of stigma within the space, something that kind of stopped people from wanting to talk about it as freely as they probably could talk about it. And it was a lot of it was just that public fear, that public judgment, that stigma that exists, where you know essentially you're saying something that goes against societal norms. So where I am today is where obviously I feel comfortable with talking about my journey, my story, you know, the ups and downs of it. But I also am very, I've been able to figure out ways to communicate with different groups of people in a way that can be received. And I'm interested in teaching other nurses how to do the same.
I think that's phenomenal. And I'm sure, just again, I have a good portion of my friends are nurses just from the amount of time I've been a nurse. Plus, I was a travel nurse for, I would say, about 70% of my career. So I know people in a multitude of states and countries. And when you're speaking to that stress, that insomnia, let's not even talk about if you're doing night shift. Let's not even talk
Mm.
about it. You know, there's a
Yes.
lot of, girl, I did night shift for about 10 of the 13 years. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
woo. So when we talk about holistic care, especially in a job that requires so much of you to be compassionate at all times, efficient,
Mm-hmm.
all the things, it leaves very little for you. Um, and as I've been on my own self growth journey, my own self care journey, I identify a lot of those things and see how they impact me in the way that you're describing. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
so being inside of this space that we share is so beautiful to me because it allows you to reflect and
Mm-hmm.
safely treat yourself in a way, either through camaraderie of other people who are finding relief from their ails, or being able to find a measurable, tangible difference in your peace,
Mm-hmm.
literally just from educating yourself about something like cannabis. So I totally get all the idiosyncrasies of nursing, and I think nurses more than anybody need the benefit of that. But
Yes.
I think that's such a beautiful thing how you went from the corporate space, dealt with some of the backlash of the corporate space, and have now migrated into the more educational and the transitional space for the patient
Mm-hmm.
and for the worker. So when you were self-educating about the cannabis space, because I've been inside of space for roughly 4 years, so not long at all. And I'll go over my journey and how I got there later. But I know the literature has rapidly changed, credentialing
Mm-hmm.
has changed, um, just standardization. So when we, even though we know we don't need to standardize everything, for it to be legitimate, like you can't standardize prayer, although there's plenty of places that try to do that.
That was petty. That was petty.
When I think about something like treating yourself with marijuana, which is very difficult to overdose on, in fact, almost clinically impossible to do so,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just finding some sort of rubric or scale for standardization so that patients can feel comfortable with self-dosing, so that clinicians, when we go to evaluate the patients that we're treating, we can measure their pain. Like we all know about pain scales. If you're a bedside nurse, especially for insurance purposes, you got 60 minutes to get in there and do your pain reassessment. Okay.
Okay.
I don't care if they're unconscious. I don't care if they ventilated. We have some sort of pain scale to assess how effective a therapy was for a patient for insurance
Mm-hmm.
purposes. So, it's for insurance purposes. Oh my gosh. J. Cole be down people neck. Anyway, what made you, or along your journey of educating yourself, what sort of made you want to standardize it? Because you've created credentialing courses for nurses to
Mm-hmm.
be able to assess pain better. Why did you identify it as an area that needed to be addressed? And what were some of the things that you found on your journey to create curriculum to standardize something like pain assessment with marijuana?
So, because I do have that performance improvement background, I do have this like very much strategic way of looking at things, right? And in my mind, I want cannabis to be acceptable in the hospital setting. And I felt like the only way that it could happen is if we have an approach to how we interact with the patients that's somewhat standardized, right? So the way that we as nurses generally deal with patients is through our assessment, diagnosis, planning, implementation, evaluation, and I embedded what I understood about cannabis into our nursing process. So, just like you would assess any other patient, every nurse should be also assessing whether they're consuming. If their tox screen shows up positive for cannabinoids, what are you choosing to use? What is your method of consumption? How much do you use? How often do you use it? Like just basic questions. But right now, it's nothing. We don't do nothing. Oh, the tox screen has positive cannabinoids. Oh, it's fine. Just move on. Let's just give them their opioids or whatever. But no, there's a lot of understanding about the person's current situation that needs to go into it. Interactions between the cannabinoids versus the other medications that we're offering them, and then just psychologically, why are they consuming? Are you using it as coping for maybe a chronic long-term pain issue, and now that you stopped, you're going to need more opioids to deal with the pain that they're experiencing in the hospital. So there's just a lot that goes into what and why and where people come from before they come to you. One thing that I don't feel like is connected all the way
Mm.
is that before you're a patient in the hospital, usually that's when we see them. We see them when they're the sickest of the sick, right?
Yeah.
But there's a period of time, usually about a decade or so, where they weren't well to begin with before they even get to us. So, what is their lifestyle before they even get to us? And who has been participating in, or supporting them or intervening with them? So, in hospital lingo, that's the continuum of care. That's obviously broken, right? But when we're talking about cannabis medicine, somewhere interwoven in there is a group of patients that aren't being addressed because of their cannabis consumption.
Facts. I'll definitely say, because I started out on an oncology unit. So cancer,
So,
bone marrow transplant, sickest of the sickest patients.
mm-hmm,
And from my very first year of nursing, I began administering drobanol and marinol, which at the time, I'm not sure if they're still the primary ones used, but those were THC and CBD derivatives that we would administer to the cancer patients. And if they had a prescription for it. And of course, I probably administered every analgesic, every any modality of pain medication that you can administer due to the type of patient population I had. I've probably administered it from
mm-hmm,
drips, subdermals, intrathecal,
mm-hmm,
topicals, rectal, buccal, like everything,
mm-hmm,
inhaler,
yep,
shots. And what I noticed, especially from having surgical patients, I've had patients where you take an old liver out, put a new liver in, old heart out, new heart in, old kidneys out,
mm-hmm,
new kidneys, like massive surgeries, massive
mm-hmm,
trauma, gunshot wounds. As I say all of that to say, I've seen the human body pretty much in every single condition it can be in.
mm-hmm,
And as far as pain management, the most holistic form of pain management I saw were when patients were taking medical grade marijuana inside a hospital
mm-hmm,
setting. They did not need GABA. They did not need opioids. They did not need 13 million different modalities of pain medicine. Usually, if they were on the cannabis, that was enough to handle their pain. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but typically speaking, I saw
mm-hmm,
a large reduction in the consumption of other modalities of pain treatment when patients had access to medical grade marijuana. And I say all that to say is you're completely right that there was not good documentation of the pain management when their tox screen did come up positive for cannabis. I
mm-hmm,
remember, on that typical urine analysis and urine screening, what you got: meth,
mm-hmm,
cocaine,
mm-hmm,
uh, opioids, marijuana, so on and so forth. And usually the protocol at that time, they come up positive for something in their urine. Up, put them on a watch. You gotta
mm-hmm,
notify the whole staff of
yep,
class schedule 1 substances,
mm-hmm,
and like you said, throw them on opioids immediately, even if their urine was not positive for that, and do this little random pain scale and hope that the patient's not addicted to opiates when they get discharged from the hospital.
yep, yep, that's it.
Now that's it. And but now what I'm seeing in the two more progressive states that I worked in before I just made the decision to retire from nursing at the bedside. Now I'm transitioning into advocacy. California is a bit more progressive. They're still sort of tight
Mm-hmm,
fisted, depending on where you were. California is a bit more progressive, and then it was Maryland, because I think I was living in DC the year that marijuana became legal there as
mm-hmm,
well. And I feel as though they had a much more open approach to incorporating marijuana back into the patient's like routine and their regimen for controlling pain. But even then, even in the 13 years I was active, the pain assessment scale never addressed marijuana. And I'm just now realizing that with you having said that. Like,
mm-hmm,
we'll assess Tylenol, we'll assess everything, but they never really did monitor that. So
yeah.
I have you found traction creating your or well, clearly you found traction, clearly. But what some of the results that you found from creating and implementing the system of assessment that you've created at the bedside?
So right now, hospitals aren't really willing to touch cannabis at all because it is a Schedule One drug, and they do get funding from the state and federal level. So and they're nonprofit, so they just can't touch it at this point. And for a while, I kind of felt like, why aren't they taking me up on this offer? You know what I mean? Like, let me just come and do this thing, but they really just can't, to be honest with you, because of the way that they receive their revenue. When it comes to, when you brought up California actually has a law for end of life patients where they can actually get access to cannabis in the hospital setting, which was I forget what they call it when it's like the first time that a bill like that's been passed. And then in Maryland, we have some stipulation where children inside of the school setting can get access to their cannabis. And then even if you're here for medical treatment at a place like John Hopkins, because that's the big medical center we have here, they can actually transfer their prescription. Like if they move from another state and they're using it medically, they can actually use it medically at Hopkins. But that's the only way. Like, it's not like Hopkins will be like, oh, we're going to prescribe medical cannabis, go to the dispensary, pick up your stuff. No, they'll only take it if you come from another state and you come here, and that's part of your treatment regimen. I
Already.
did work. I didn't mention earlier when I was telling you all about my career, because I told you I could talk for a long time. I worked in uh, quality, and I did data analysis. So going through charts and looking for trends and things of that nature. And what I found a lot of the doctors would do in that particular role, at least, they would mention that the patient was on marijuana, but they wouldn't do anything with that information. It'd be like one short sentence in the notes that said patient treats with marijuana, period. And then they would talk about everything else.
Okay, what we gonna do with that?
Right. Like, it was so bizarre.
But when there were, I know, again, I can only speak for my career, and of course I'm now looking deeper into research, but it's been available the entire time I'm in nursing medically from pharmacy. So if they noted that, why wouldn't they go ahead and begin the patient on a treatment regimen to find their safe dose and their
Because they don't
effective dose?
know. Because they don't know, they're scared of it. They don't want to touch it. They're not educating most providers. If you bring it up with them, because the stigma is so strong, the personal opinions kind of get in the way of even receiving information about it. So that's just where we are today, in the medical field specifically. So we have to remember, medical professionals tend to be a little bit more straight laced and have this persona that we have to uphold. We have to, be the caretakers and the superheroes and all these things. So to even bring up cannabis is almost goes against everything that, being a medical professional means. So
I feel you, and I totally completely agree with you that that is the vantage point. But it's like, if you're willing to provide opioids, and we ain't gonna get into the Sackler family, then you need to be open to. Anyway, I digress.
But
So let's.
but that's a good point too, because a lot of people don't think that opioids are bad. I was one of those people. Like, I worked on a stroke unit and was medicating I'm not stroke, I have, but spinal cord unit, medicating these young people, generally, status post a gunshot wound or whatever, and they would get over 150 milligrams of oxycodone months after surgery, right? So what is the plan beyond this 150 milligrams of oxycodone twice a day, and then the other 100 milligrams of oxycontin once a day? Where are we going beyond, this current treatment plan? And I was the nurse that would show up to your door ready 1 minute before you was about to ring. I was standing at your door. Yes, I got your medicine. Yes.
Ready, and the graham crackers, because I remember.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. Extra ice. You like extra ice? Okay.
Peanut butter on top. Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes, but when I think back at that, like the idea of that, it was just normal. It was normalized for me. Like, I didn't see anything wrong about it. But I mean, if you really think about this is part of your acute phase of your treatment. and we're trying to prepare you to go home. There's no way you coming off of 150 milligrams of oxycodone. Is that? I mean, there's no way. And then after I gave you the 150 milligrams, an hour later, I had to come in with the suppository and the Colace to make sure that you weren't impacted.
Let's touch on that for a second, because I think most people now have enough common lay knowledge of opioids to know how drastically they affect people, just from the health crises that we've had, with the opioid crisis that we've had. Most people probably know someone who's OD'd on opioids, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a
Mm-hmm.
really unhealthy culture surrounding opioids right now. A standard dose of oxycodone is 5 milligrams. So the fact that they would put such heavy surgical patients on such heavy doses, and they know they're not up and mobilizing, their bowels are already slow, you're locking up their gastrointestinal tract, so their digestive system completely shot. Nutrition's going to be an issue. It's too much. It's too
Mm-hmm.
much. Whereas I noticed that some of my oncology patients literally being able to take anywhere between 5 and 50 milligrams of marijuana didn't even need the opioids,
Yeah.
and it metabolized in their system. It was much more holistic. I just, girl. So what do you think are what do you think would become necessary? Because we know it's a monetary game in this country.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What would need to be necessary, since you're one of the pioneers going through the hurdles of standardizing something like assessing the pain? What what would be necessary for them to be willing to forego the dependence that they have, and I'm talking about the hospital system has on the pharmaceutical system to provide opioids, and to begin incorporating. Now, I'm not even talking about replacing, but it begin incorporating medical grade marijuana and cannabinoids to patients for pain relief, for more positive outcomes.
It would have to be descheduled, so it can no longer be a Schedule One. I think that's the first thing. Well, no, let me back up. The first thing actually is, let's have a plan for how we can make the right people to make the money that needs to be made. So right now, I don't think there's a strategy or a plan around how we can capitalize on it. I know there are some states, I can't remember the state offhand, some states aren't moving forward with implementing cannabis at the state level, on a recreational level, because they can't figure out how to tax it.
Money
So
game. Money game.
always. So once that plan is established, and I believe they're actively working, because they know that it is a significant source of revenue. It's been proven time and time again. I think Maryland made 600 billion last year, 2021, on cannabis sales alone. So they
With
know
a
it's a
B?
money. Yes, B. Uh-huh.
Billion with a
Yes,
B?
yes, ma'am. One state.
In 1 year?
One state. And we small. We a small state.
Oh, shout out to Johns Hopkins. I worked at Bayview for a year.
Oh, did
Bayview.
you?
Yes, you. Hey, Miss Linda. Anyway, uh, but yeah, so but that is a tiny state. Maryland is a very small state. And
hmm
I've heard the numbers. Like, I thought it was a false statistic. So I that's something I need to do my due diligence on. I haven't looked up a bunch of the stats regarding it, but they say even like Colorado alone makes close to $1 trillion annually
Yeah, I
now.
believe so. hmm
Oh my God. So
Because
to
they're a rec
all
state. Think about it. Because we're a medical state. We only have medical sales. They're a
that is
recreational and medical state. Yes.
Hmm. Do you have any insight on, because now we have a mix of states. We have states that aren't legal either way. We have medically only legal states, meaning you have to go through credentialing, at least a licensure from the state, and find a physician who's going to be willing to write your orders and update them regularly. And then you have states that are both medically and recreationally legal. And I still always advocate for medical. It's fine if you live in a state that's recreational. It's perfectly fine to do recreational, but I do like medical, because I just having the patient care aspect of it is far easier to track, document, and measure and monitor. But I'm all for recreational as well. Um, uh, what would you say, or do you have any insight into the states that have both recreational and medical versus being in just a medical state, and their income, is it far greater in states that have both?
Yeah, because it's a tourist attraction. So if you have
Mm,
recreational, yeah, you'll come. Like people would come just for access to, safe, clean cannabis to be able to consume it outdoors. Like that's a real accomplishment to be able to go to maybe a festival or go to a cafe or a bar and sit down and consume your cannabis. So that attracts a lot of people.
Y'all have, yeah, Maryland, in fact, yeah, in DC. I remember walking up the street and people just blazing. I'm like, y'all real wild.
Right. Right. Y'all do that here. Okay. Well, it's we I went the first time I went to the National Cannabis Festival, it was surreal. I was like, whoa.
Where's that?
And it was in DC. So
When
it's the
is that? When is
largest, it's in usually around 420. They've been doing it for the past, I don't know how many years they've been doing it now. Yes, it's amazing. But but to be able to go, and it's one of the largest cannabis festivals at that, and
it?
to see all of the people. And I remember the thing that shocked me the most, just being a Black woman, I'm generally surrounded by other Black people on a social sense, right? So when I went, I was really more surprised at how, like, eclectic the group was. Like everybody was different. It was white people, Black people, Asian. I mean, just everybody. Like you could go from goth to, African to, I mean, it just didn't matter who you were. Everybody was there for the same reason. And it was just so amazing to kind of see how everybody was able to connect just off of the plant.
Yes. I think
It was,
that's very unifying too. And I'm not naive to also be able to play devil's advocate and recognize the barriers that legalization does put in place. I saw that comment on a different page come across screen. They're like, yes, legalization is good, but, and I'm like, I'll take a moment to acknowledge that. Like, some people don't have the money for the physician and the annual fees, because it's much more affordable now than when it first came out. Because I remember, like, I'm a caregiver for someone. When I went and got their card, it was 75 for them, 75 for myself. Then it was 200 for the initial set of orders, and then 200 6 months after. It's far more affordable now. It's like half of that price as far as renewing the physician's orders and things like that. But then there's also the fees associated with getting the marijuana. Of course, instead of buying from, little shady man off the street around the corner, there's a bit of an upcharge inside of the conveniences that you're paying in a facility. So yes, I do note that it's a first world problem to be fighting for legalization in this way. Um, but I still think it's a necessary step, and I still advocate for medical legalization, just because that does open up so many other avenues for standardization. It opens up avenues for decriminalization, because it does allow people to get a fresh start and be able to get legal credentialing. And I get it. I get where we are with the government, but
yeah,
and we see the landscape. There's less than 1% of dispensary owners who are of color. Less than
yeah.
1%.
Hmm.
So I do see the hurdles. I do see the financial barriers, but that just makes me want to continue to teach people skills to get alternative sources of income and still get them credentialed. Because the first thing I recommend, to that note as well, someone's like, okay, what about cops pulling people over? For people who do partake heavily and you constantly smell of it or you have it on you, it's safer to have a legal card, because there's less precedence for them to arrest you. Because if you're still in a state that is not legal in some shape, form, or capacity, or even if you're in a state that's not recreationally legal but medically legal and you still have marijuana on you, you can still get serious jail time, unfortunately. I wish they were working to change the laws rapidly, but like we were just touching on with the financial piece, until they're able to replace the income and the revenue that they generate from having inmates, let's call it what it is, because it,
Hmm.
like the state of Florida, the last metric I saw for each inmate that's housed inside of a system and inside of, like, the state of Florida, they get $68,000 per inmate. So it's quite lucrative, regardless of what the charge is. And of course, then it's more money. The state gets paid more money to feed them, house them, clothe them, monitor them,
Mm-hmm.
staff for them if it's a felony or higher. And we all know
Mm-hmm.
about criminal felonization of marijuana. Like if you have a gram on you, which is a standard dose, that's a felony. If you have cannabis oil on you in any shape or form, like so that's dab or vape pen or anything like that, that's a felony. If you have tincture on you, that's a felony. And
Mm-hmm.
it's insane to me because those are standard doses for me to give my patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Standard dose.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and just clarify too. So I know sometimes it's confusing for people to understand that we have federal laws. So, and that's what you're speaking about, those felonies. So if you were to take cannabis from across state lines, get on the plane with it, get caught with it, things of that nature, or if you just happen to get caught by a federal, agency or whatever, you will get a felony behind it off the first offense, I believe.
Yes.
But state laws are able to operate on their own accord. They have their own rules behind it, but you have to be mindful because you could, like, you might get pulled over by a state trooper. You could get pulled over by a federal, I don't even know what they're called, but one of those federal regulators or whatever. But the outcomes are significantly different. Where in the state that's most likely decriminalized, you might get a ticket. They might just stop you, make you pay a fine or whatever. You could end up in jail if you get caught on a plane or something like that. So it's
That
just
part.
and it's confusing. It's so confusing, And part of the other issue is like people go to places like California, and because they have so much access to it, think that they can just take it home to whatever state they're going to, and no, like illegal. You could absolutely go to jail. Now, do people get away with it? Yes, they get away with it, but do you want to be one of the few that don't get away with it? I don't know. I ain't really willing to take that chance. Look at you. I ain't messing with you. I ain't messing with you.
Anywho, and I completely comply with all the laws of the United States of America. TSA does not
Yes,
care.
man.
So,
Yes, man.
but I think that's such a beautiful thing. That we are able to have these types of discussions and get this knowledge in front of people and just have these frank, candid conversations. Because working in California, which is legal both ways, I worked in DC, in Maryland by proxy because I did John Hopkins. I always want to plural anyway. And then I did Georgetown. Um, have worked heavily in Atlanta, which is not legal. It was so interesting going from legal states to non-legal states. That
Mhm.
was interesting with patient care.
Mhm.
Um, I've done North Carolina, Florida, like I've been all over the place and seeing how drastically the standard of care even is different. Like I had a patient who their UTOX came up positive for cannabis, and this was in Georgia, and it was one of the most upsetting things for me because I remember the nurse manager at that time went out of her way, which I thought it was a HIPAA violation, but somehow they did. They said it was not a HIPAA violation. Went out of her way to call his PO to let him know that his hospital UTOX was positive. I'm like, ladies, that's none of your business. That's not your business. It's not your business. You know what I mean? But so thinking
Right?
about he was inpatient in the hospital for I think well I don't want to HIPAA, but something completely unrelated and it's standard. I think for whatever reason they need to do a urinalysis and they also did a UTOX, came back positive for cannabis, and then she went out of her way to call his PO and report. So yeah, child. But so things like that. I think about things like that, and there were legal implications that came about after that because I remember they came up to the
I'm
unit
sure.
and you know, but he was having surgery, so he still had to stay, and we still had to manage around that. Now he's handcuffed to the bed, and it was a whole thing. It was a whole thing. It was a whole thing. So I'm looking forward to the day that decriminalization happens, but as we just discussed, that won't happen until the state is making more money than having inmates, and they figure out how to get their taxes off of it.
Mhm.
Um, man, and then that segues sort of into the other thing that I wanted to ask you about. How have you had time to connect more deeply with more deeply? Yep. Have you had time to connect deeply with the people in this ecosystem of color that are considered owners, dispensary owners, or people who actually own the land that they grow on, and what their sort of plan is moving forward into this sort of initiative?
Yeah, so my personal experience mostly has been in Maryland, like where I've kind of really dug deep into meeting dispensary owners, growers, hemp farm growers, all those different groups of people. So in Maryland, we actually have the first youngest black owned female dispensary owner. Her name is Hope Wiseman. Yes, she lives here. So I've had some connection with her. Um, we have, I think, two, and don't quote me, y'all, I might be wrong, but I think it's two dispensaries of color here in Maryland, and the other person happens to be female as well. Um,
Oh, we
yeah,
gotta
I'm
talk
not.
about this. Oh yeah.
And then, so I went to a grow farm here, and that was really interesting by way of, yep, that's her.
Follow.
She's really sweet too. Um, we have a grow farm. I went to visit a grow farm here, and what was interesting to me was the amount. One, they were growing. The grow farm itself was growing, and they were like, it was huge. So they used to grow flowers for Home Depot, and they stopped because they were making so much money through the cannabis. And so, yes, and when I went to go visit them, like the grow farm itself, like the way where they house the plants, it was huge, right? Like already football size huge. They had another section that they were building and planning to put more plants in, and it was over the size of another football field in there. Like I felt like we were walking forever to go through the different sections of this facility.
Wow.
It was amazing. And what was even more amazing to me was like how process oriented they were. Their ability to recreate the plants over and over again was very interesting. With similar genetic profiles, they were like testing all types of like equipment and like different types of technology to help, like, like trim more buds in a day or something like that. Like it was so interesting to me.
That
And
sounds
then
so interesting to
it
me.
was so interesting. I mean, even down to the chemicals. Like I know that when you're growing, like everybody has their own like concoction of how to to nurture the plant itself, like what nutrients you put
Mhm.
into it, and depending on how organic you want it to be, like you'll use different types of chemical compounds, or maybe you'll just use sugar
Mhm.
and water. But
Mhm.
when I went to the hemp farm alternatively, it was super, super natural. So like all of the like production around the grow farm was like, wow, it's so process oriented. Whereas the hemp farm was more like, we just planted these seeds in here, we watched it grow. I was like, oh, how sweet. That is
Definitely.
so sweet.
I'm always
So,
commented on that.
yeah, so it's very different. And even going from dispensary to dispensary, seeing how
Mhm.
they're run, seeing the types of bud tenders that are employed is, I found, is directly based on like the manager and how they set their priorities and what they feel is important. Um, so it's very much a culture driven industry. I mean, on
Mhm.
top of the capitalistic part, but it is very culture driven. A lot of the bud tenders tend to be consumers themselves, so very, very passionate about the plant. Although generally a high school graduate, so they usually didn't know much more than what they understood about the plant from personal experience. So, I mean, yeah, I've had some pretty cool experiences. I've seen different business owners, types. Some dispensary owners are very nice. Some of them are very shrewd, just in it for the money. You know what I mean? So it's
Mhm.
just, yeah, it's
I don't think
interesting.
anything goes well when people are in it just for the money, be it they're a nurse just for the paycheck or they're
Yeah,
growing weed just for the money. Yeah.
yeah, I agree with that.
So bringing this all home and rounding it out, because I think what you do is so phenomenal and necessary. And like you said, we're in a space where hospitals aren't even taking this mode of administration seriously, even though there's pharmaceutical methods available. There's people like yourself who are willing to come in and educate the hospitals and implement these systems and help them. do these things. You've been able to create a CEU course, which I think is amazing. And I have that linked in the bio, and people will be able to reach out to you as well. But in addition to that, the piece I wanted to touch on finally was that you help nurses transition from where they are now, be it at the bedside or elsewhere, and sort of help curate their career to prepare to step into advocacy. So, can you touch on?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier. So the training course has always been in existence. And what I found was there was some sort of block. Like they're like, once they took the training course, they wouldn't really do much with it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I created was, well, what I decided to do was kind of figure out step by step, what did I do to get to where I'm at? Like I've been featured in High Times. I've been featured in Baltimore Business Journal as a healthcare leader. I get asked to speak at different events. I've written a children's book. I have another book on the way. Like I have all these things going on. And at some point in 2021, I was like, sis, you can't do all of this by yourself. So I took a pause, I took some inventory and I literally sat down and just kind of quantified the steps that I took to get to where I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, what I do is help other nurses build brands around what they do. So whether, crafting your mission statement and your vision statement, getting an understanding of, how to build a business around what you do, being comfortable with speaking online with different platforms, whether, it's my homegirl at Digital Green Book or it's somebody at a workers' comp conference. Can I have these conversations without sacrificing who I am? Because I feel like a lot of times we tend to sacrifice who we are when we're trying to do something that goes against the grain. And building yourself up. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Building yourself up to be an advocate in this space and to make money and leverage your story in order to be successful in whatever it is you're trying to do. So a lot of the nurses that I've worked with, they have a passion for cannabis, be it they, use it for a chronic disorder. They have family members that may have experienced some sort of significant results from it, or or just have a general passion for holistic wellness, plant medicine as a whole, and how can you incorporate it into what you do like on a regular basis um, using leveraging the internet, leveraging social media to become a thought leader in the space. So that way you can get bookings. That way you can advocate for your patients. That way you can, be at the bedside even and being able to communicate with your patients effectively with confidence. Right. So I mean, it's just so many different ways you could take this information and spread it. But for me, the passion lies in being able to make sure that the path is laid so that way you can advocate the way that you feel comfortable or feel you need to advocate. So, like in general, my personal standpoint is everybody here has a purpose, and
Yes.
not everybody knows what that purpose is. So, through self discovery, being able to identify that and then move in that purpose in a way that's intentional, and whether it's cannabis that belongs part of that narrative or not, I think everybody should have access to somebody to help pave that way for them.
And it's all about access. I'm all about access in every area of my life. It would be selfish of me to learn information and not disseminate that. So literally I take phone calls from people who just want to understand it better. I direct people to facilities that help them get credentialing. Literally, if you're having chronic pain and cannabis or marijuana is something that you or your loved one have not investigated, especially if you live in the state of Florida, DM me seriously because it's too many things out here that can help you have a higher quality of life. And I'm not just
Mm-hmm.
advocating that just so you can be stoned. If you want to do that, you can do that too. But literally, I wish I had discovered marijuana a year earlier because my grandfather passed the year before I got it from my father. And literally, he was having neuropathy really bad from diabetes, and my father suffers from neuropathy. If I just had access to medical grade CBD, I really think he would have been here longer because I really think he succumbed to the pain associated with neuropathy, associated with diabetes. So
Mm-hmm.
things like that. If you don't think it's for you, don't even make that assumption. If you're having pain, investigate it. But thank you so much, Ashley. I think you've been phenomenal. You are a wealth of information. Um, I have all of her socials linked in my description box if you're watching on YouTube, and on the post if you're watching on Facebook. And what's something that you would like to leave with the people before we head out?
That's a good question. I didn't expect that one. Do what you think is best. Operate in your highest good. If something is not resonating with you, if it's a boyfriend, if it's a job, if it's whatever, like, don't do it. Like, I am so, like, seriously, like, I just really want everybody to be able to live the best life they can live. And I think that everybody deserves access to that. And I just feel like for so many people, we self-sacrifice for another person or another thing or some sort of commodity that everybody says that we need. So yeah, that's
Ooh,
all I got.
preach. Ooh,
That's all I
sermon.
got.
Pass the collection plate. Wait a second. Girl, and nurses are self-sacrificial now.
All the time. And that's another reason why I always appreciated educating, is because, like, I believe that I see the trend in the way that nurses want to give so much of themselves and they never want to take care of themselves. We be real quick to be like, our knees hurt, but we gonna get this 12-hour shift in. Now, how you walking on them knees if they hurt? How you doing that?
I gotta pee, but I'm gonna hold it because my patient might.
Okay, like, no, like, we need to eat, we need to pee, we stay be doing that kind of stuff. And, like, I'm just tired of it for myself, and I'm tired of witnessing it in other people too. So
I sort of want to do a cross-sectional long-term study on nurses and their butane and creatinine, because I really think this is a career that gives you early kidney failure. Anywho, but anyone watching, please definitely reach out to Ashley, especially my nursing community. I love bringing trusted individuals onto my channel, and I hope you've learned something from this conversation. I know I have. I know there's 2 individuals I'm gonna be looking up soon, and I might be taking a trip to Maryland just to watch the growing process, because I love how stuff works. So thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you for all you do, and thank you for being a light to people inside of this space and in other spaces.
thank you. I really appreciate it. I didn't realize we had got to an hour, and the more that I do this, I realize I have so much more to say. Like, I know I didn't tell y'all enough. So if you do have questions, let me know.
That part, I sure will, and I would love to have you on again. Most definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, Leah says she's waiting for you to come back. There you go. So thank you so much. We're wrapping up. See y'all later.